Star Wars and horror. Do they mix? Join me as I look into the relationship between horror and Star Wars canon, covering a variety of Star Wars media, from a mobile game up to the TV. And make sure to stay tuned, as one of the best examples is found in one of the most surprising of places. So grab some seat as I dive into Star Wars' relationship with horror. First, I'm looking at a movie clip you'll be familiar with, the Darth Vader hallway scene from Rogue One. While the movie is clearly not a horror, this scene is reminiscent of the genre. Here Vader is alike to an unstoppable slasher villain, hacking his way through the helpless rebel guards. Early in the scene, the rebel guards find themselves stuck behind a jammed door, and the lights go out. This immediately intensifies the situation, as they're now trapped. Behind them, darkness. Enter the sound of mechanical breathing. Someone is in there with them, cloaked by the darkness. Vader ignites his lightsaber, illuminating himself with a sinister red glow. This introduction is terrifying, and Vader hasn't yet even swung his lightsaber. From here, the rebels shoot at Vader, and he does a slow, intimidating walk towards them. Vader isn't scared. He knows that these rebels can't even scratch him. He tears through them effortlessly. One of the rebels passes the Death Star plans through the jammed door, moments before he breathes his last. The door opens and Vader continues his rampage. The guard who now has the plans trips. This is a classic trope used in many horror films, although not exclusive to the genre. This rebel does get away, but only barely, with 3 guards being butchered behind him. Sound is also used so well here, with the background music, Hope, by Michael Giacchino, amplifying the tension, and the screams adding to the fear. This scene is an amazing scene, and there's so much more that could be said about it. But from what I've discussed, I'd say it definitely has earned its place in this video. Next is Project Blackwing. There's not massive detail here, but this is basically zombies in Star Wars. What happened is the Empire ran this operation in attempt of unlocking immortality, but accidentally created a virus that would kill its hosts and turn their bodies cannibalistic. These zombies walked slowly, were very resistant to attacks, and had grey-green skin. On top of all that, the virus could communicate with itself, allowing the zombies to act as one and even learn from those they observe. This included figuring out how to use weapons such as blasters and turrets, and even piloting starships. Fortunately, the zombies were contained, but according to rumours, some criminal organisations got their hands on samples of the Blackwing virus. The virus later broke out again, but the rebels managed to contain it this time. The Blackwing virus has only appeared in the mobile game Star Wars Commander, but has been mentioned in multiple reference materials. I find it crazy that something as scary as these zombies lies in the Star Wars universe, and there's clearly room to use this in the future. By the way, if you like the sound of a story on these zombies, although they aren't covered much in canon, they're actually based on The Sickness from Star Wars Legends, which you can read about in the books Death Troopers and Red Harvest. On the topic of zombies, I'd also like to mention the Geonosian brainworms from the Clone Wars. These parasites would infect their hosts and take control of them, even after the host's death. On top of this, they could access memories from the host, being able to impersonate them, and even use the Force. Also, just look at these shots of the worms and zombies. Of course, the horror in the Clone Wars is limited, but I think that it's not completely absent, and it's worth considering. The Clone Wars also has dived into witches and zombie witches, although they haven't really been used in a horror sense. It's clear though that there's opportunity there for horror to be used. Moving on, there's the book Dark Legends. This is a collection of short stories, each diving into spookier areas of the Star Wars universe, and targeted to a younger audience. Recently on the channel, I covered one of these stories, called A Life Immortal, and I'd definitely recommend the story. I'd even argue that it taps into a level of body horror, although obviously in a manner that ensures it remains appropriate for kids. Overall, the book includes some interesting scary concepts, imitating ghost stories, werewolves, and even the horror novella Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Dark Legends is probably my best recommendation for someone looking for canon Star Wars horror in book form. After this, there's the Tales From series of comics, which also includes a bunch of ghost stories, but this time it's the characters in-universe telling them. These comics started with Tales from Vader's Castle in 2018, then came Return to Vader's Castle in 2019. After this was a gap until 2021, when Ghosts of Vader's Castle released. Next there was Tales from the Rancor Pit in 2022, and then there's Tales from the Death Star, released in 2023. All of these comics contain multiple short stories for a younger audience, with spookier themes. Things that have been included in these collections are witches, ghosts, vampires, giants, a Frankenstein's monster-like character, lava zombies, and so much more. These comics are filled with references to classic horror and are simply fun reads. One of the stories I enjoy is the second issue of Tales from Vader's Castle, which references Dracula and Christopher Lee's connection to the character. Next, we've got some Star Wars comic crossover events, the Screaming Citadel collection and the Dark Droids collection. Star Wars The Screaming Citadel is a crossover story from 2017 between the Star Wars and Dr. Aphra comic series running at the time. According to the co-writer Jason Aaron, it's a gothic horror Star Wars story, and the influence of this genre can be seen in the finished product. The villain of the story, the Queen of Cataphaton, is an intimidating foe, and she proves herself to be deadly and terrifying. The Screaming Citadel is an interesting story for gothic horror fans who love Star Wars, although the horror is a bit limited. Now on to Dark Droids, another crossover event, this time with the premise being that the droids and even cyborgs of the Star Wars galaxy were getting corrupted and taken over by a ridiculously powerful droid intelligence called the Scourge. This story was also described by its writer, Charles Soule, as a Star Wars horror, and he used many horror references when writing, including the film Alien. This crossover was very big, having its own 5-issue comic run, a 4-issue spin-off run called D-Squad, and crossing into the current comic series Star Wars, Darth Vader, Dr. Aphra, and Bounty Hunters. If you're interested in the concept of large-scale Star Wars horror, then the Dark Droids event would be a good place to go. After this, I'm departing slightly from Star Wars canon to discuss the Star Wars Battlefront 2 game mode, Ewok Hunt. This game mode is genuinely terrifying, and involves 18 stormtroopers trying to survive the night on Endor, while Ewoks hunt them. The game begins with only 2 Ewoks, but whenever a stormtrooper dies, that player also becomes an Ewok. This is a really fun game mode, and blends horror into the Star Wars universe in a small but very cool way. Finally, there's a brilliant short story from the comic Return of the Jedi Ewoks 1, which uses horror really effectively. The art here is phenomenal, and elevates the story a lot considering there's no dialogue. The villain of the story is a Gorax, and let's just say it takes a monster which is already quite scary, and makes it even more terrifying. The story is very short, but that is not an issue, as it uses its time well. What I find interesting about this story though is its placement. Return of the Jedi Ewoks 1 is about Ewoks telling campfire stories, and they vary in tone massively. Prior to the story I've been discussing, called Paplu's Tale, there's another story called The Watling's Tale, which is very much a kid's story with a simple and cute art style. I just find it funny how in one comic, you go from a very wholesome and happy story to such a dark and scary story. Anyway, before I go, let's take a quick overview of Star Wars horror and discuss whether it's a concept with great potential. Looking at the media from this video, I think it's clear that horror can mix into the Star Wars universe, but so far that connection is quite limited. This makes sense when considering how Star Wars has always been very accessible for younger audiences, and I don't think stronger horror is something Star Wars necessarily needs. However, there's many aspects of the Star Wars universe which would be perfect for a deeper dive into the horror genre, such as zombies and other monsters, if Disney wished to go in that direction. Also, I feel it worthwhile to mention a tweet by Doctor Strange director Scott Derrickson, where he showed interest in the idea of a Star Wars horror movie based around Hoth, in the vein of The Thing or Lovecraft's In the Mountains of Madness. So yeah, there's many interesting ideas out there. Anyway, that's all for now. I hope you enjoyed this exploration of Star Wars horror, and we hope to see you later at Vault Holocron.